This is Kate Sang from beautifullyimperfect.net, and I'm here with Devin Lenz. Hi, Devin. How are you today?
Hi, Kate. I am well, thank you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you, and thank you for being here today.
Sure.
Devin's going to share with us his 20 plus year addiction journey, starting with his unexpected diagnosis of West Nile virus. So, can you share briefly about that story, Devin?
I'd be happy to. So, in August of the year 2010, August 21st to be exact, I was feeling a little bit run down, nothing terribly out of the ordinary, but I lay down to take a nap late in the afternoon, and I woke up a few hours later and I wasn't able to sit up in bed. So I was laying on top of the covers and it was just startling. I felt fluish, but beyond that, and I could still feel everything. I could still feel my legs and my feet, but I couldn't move them and I couldn't sit up in bed. So I yelled out to my wife and had her call 911. And I was originally taken to a local ER, and they ran some basic diagnostic tests on me, and I was coherent, and it was a Saturday night going into Sunday morning, so of course the emergency room was busy and chaotic, and so they quickly admitted me. And then Sunday morning, a physician came around and apologetically stated that they didn't have a neurologist on staff on the weekends. So I asked my wife to transfer me or have me transferred to Emory University Hospital, which was nearby to the hospital that I had been admitted to. So we took an ambulance ride over to Emory late that following Sunday afternoon. And they immediately I was admitted to the Emory University ICU, the intensive care unit, and they did a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture, as they call it, and sent the fluid out for analysis a couple of days. And it took a while to get the result. And in the intervening days, I suffered respiratory failure, and they had to connect me to a ventilator and then intubate me. So it gets really foggy. Yeah, it gets really foggy at that point. And they were actually starting to the doctors were starting to prepare my wife for the possibility that they might not actually know what caused this sudden onset paralysis. And then I think on the fifth day, the doctor enthusiastically ran to my wife and said, "We got it. We figured it out. We determined that there's a presence of specific antibodies in his spinal fluid that points to West Nile virus." So from there, they transferred me to something known as an LTAC, which stands for long-term acute care.
Okay.
And they specialized in getting me off the ventilator. And they did it remarkably fast. They got me off in a couple of weeks. And while I was being weaned off the vent, as they say, they sent a representative from Atlanta's Shepherd Center.
Okay.
Which is a spinal and brain injury rehabilitation hospital, a private specialty hospital that happens to be here in Atlanta. So I took my third ambulance ride from the LTAC place over to Shepherd. And that's when I began the true process of coming to terms with being disabled, learning how to use the wheelchair, learning what my rights are under the ADA. The Shepherd Center is a magnificent facility, and they have a very comprehensive continuum of care where their physical and occupational therapy extends to introducing you to sports, dealing with emotional issues, and so it was a godsend. I'm very fortunate that I was able to experience that. So that's the, I guess, long-winded answer of how I got from taking a nap and not being able to get up to transitioning to life in a wheelchair.
Completely life-changing in that 3 to 4 week period.
It was 3 hospitals over a period of 3.5 months. So I went in late August and got out in mid-November.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So like the seasons had changed. All of a sudden it was the holidays, and
Yes.
yeah, but I had a pre-existing condition as well as far as addiction is concerned. So that had been an issue in my marriage for years.
And
So
where were you at with that when this whole, all transpired?
I was in a terrible place with it. In retrospect, so I had lost my job at CNN. I was a writer producer in their on-air promotion and marketing department. So I wrote and produced the commercials, the advertisements that you see
Mm-hmm.
for CNN shows and the network as a whole within regular commercial breaks. So in between car commercials and pharmaceutical commercials and whatnot, or Geico commercials, if you see an ad for tonight on Anderson Cooper, we look behind the scene. Those are promos that are done in-house. All television stations have a little internal advertising agency where they fill up the commercial spots that they haven't sold to advertisers, their bread and butter. So you plug in your own in-house ads for your shows in those places.
Got it.
So that's what I did at CNN. But can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Because you're frozen on this end. I just want to make sure you can still hear me.
I can hear you.
You're back. So I had like a 2-year war of attrition with my boss, and eventually got a third performance warning in a 2-year time period, and I was shown the door. I don't think it was the result of my substance abuse, but I can say with absolute certainty that it didn't help. As far as my my consistency was concerned, and it interfered with my work ethic and my ability to manage conflict and all that stuff. So I was compromised, but news is really stressful anyway. So that being in that environment and that pressure cooker, I went into my relationship with CNN as an addict as well. I was an addict along that continuum or that journey for 27 years. When I got to CNN, I was at probably I don't know, probably the halfway point in the 27-year period.
Okay. So when this happened, the diagnosis with West Nile and being at the Shepherd Center, obviously life changed. So how did that change the addiction path that you were on?
Well, my ex, my wife at the time told me this is a perfect time for you to kind of work on that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so overwhelmed with the disability factor that I really didn't care about, getting high or buying beer or anything like that. So it was easy for me to abstain from beer and pot and painkillers. However, at about the 5-month mark, when I got my hand controls for my car, and I went back to work at Georgia Public Broadcasting, I felt I had my mobility. I was back out in the world, and that's when the little voice told me to swing by that gas station and buy a 6-pack of beer. And to a certain extent, that was also normalizing. It felt there was a comfort factor in me kind of getting back to my habits, my passions, and for many years my biggest hobby was getting buzzed. That's what drew me into substance abuse to begin with. I think there are lots of different reasons why people might gravitate towards altering their moods with drugs and alcohol. But for me, I didn't really have any tragedy or anything like that. I just loved the way being buzzed felt. As a teenager, when I drank beer, I thought it was hilarious.
Right.
Smoking pot made me laugh. So looking back, with hindsight, what I like to often say is that, addicts start out just wanting to be happy. They think that they have found something that makes them happy or comfortable or safe or normal. you hear it in AA meetings a lot. I felt like I was comfortable in my skin for the first time. I wasn't an uncomfortable person. For me, it was like going to Six Flags or
Yeah,
a great movie. Like having a couple of beers is like, it taking 5 Percocet for me was like energizing. I
gotcha.
was, I felt famous or something like, wow, it was like
Full of
magic.
life. Yeah,
Yeah, it was invigorating. So that's what makes it so seductive, in
sure.
my opinion. And I want to say, just for the record, anything I say about addiction or my experience is coming from a purely subjective place. I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. I might have more experience in the recovery mode or milieu than somebody who's never been exposed to it. But I have to kind of bring my humility into context and say, well, you know, I might throw out a bunch of fancy words and talk. I'll hear myself talking like a counselor or an expert, and I'm like, dude, no, I just happen to be verbose. But when I'm talking about this stuff, it's just like what happened to me, how it made me feel, what I learned when I went to rehab, and how I'm interpreting it now 2 years into uh, sobriety or recovery.
I gotcha. Well, carries a wealth of knowledge, so I respect that.
Sure. Thank you.
Um, so, so when you came out of the Shepherd Center and you were going back to normal life, as you say, do you
Yeah.
think that some of those struggles and challenges, both emotional and physical, played a role into, some of the addiction issues, or had you pretty much dealt with all of that?
No, I had not dealt with any of it. It I think that yes, because on a very, very deep level, I was angry,
Hmm.
so deeply angered that I wasn't even aware of it.
Okay.
Because I've always been my personality type is one that compartmentalizes
Hmm.
and intellectualizes things. So I didn't know it at the time, but yeah, it made me want to get buzzed more than ever. And unfortunately, there's a concept that states that addiction is a progressive disease. It gets worse over
Hmm.
time. Our ability as addicts to manage it becomes radically diminished as we get older. So I was well into that progression, and then I had this weird central nervous system event that may I and to back up, I depression also runs in my family, so I think that some of what I was doing over the years was self-medicating to cope with. Uh, Depression sounds like this big, heavy word, but for me, it was really just my my experience with depression is just like profound, debilitating apathy. Like beginning in my 20s, I would just like say, darn, I don't want to do anything. I'm not like sad.
Sure.
I'm just there were times when I didn't want to smoke pot, which was a huge thing. Like,
Hmm.
wow. So there's the depression factor that was going on with me, and then there's disability, and then if you want to call addiction an illness, so there were, not to mention just midlife stress with not knowing what I wanted to do with my career, fighting with my spouse more, and so all these things, it wasn't,
Population.
yeah, at the time it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I am so overwhelmed with these things, I need to escape to beer or whatever. Nothing like that. It was always just like, hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere,
Right.
let's get some Heineken. I can, it's been 3 weeks since I bother my poor physician for, a prescription to an opiate, I can probably get her to call one in, because I'm good at charming physicians into, prescribing medications for me.
Okay.
And so, I never really doctor shopped that much, but I would binge, I'd be like, okay, I know that doctor can't prescribe any more narcotics for a few weeks, so I won't do any. I'll just get some pot and drink a bunch of beer. But anyway, so yeah, there were a bunch of things, I think, and addiction runs in my family too. So it's like addiction. My mom's still an alcoholic. My dad killed himself when I was 25. If there are hereditary components to these things, which I believe that there are, but I know that some, I don't know how much that, we can't quantify that, right? I mean, I just know that it runs in families. So I think that there were nurture and nature elements that factored into me doing things. But to some extent, I often feel like for me, those overcomplicate it. And I don't mean to be simplistic, I just love the way it felt.
Sure. When it comes down to it, that's the baseline.
Yeah. And I think that on a biological level, you're really you're tampering with some very delicate structures in your mind, your your neurotransmitters. They've done CT and scans and MRI scans of addicts' brains, and it's astonishing that it changes the physical shape of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the right and left parietal lobes get smaller. This one counselor at the treatment facility that I was in said, you're compromising parts of the brain that deal with spatial orientation. But these parts of the brain also deal with relationships. They also deal with honesty. So I think that, you put the umbrella label of denial on things, but you're really kind of like turning yourself into a bit of a zombie.
Sure.
Because your central processing unit becomes corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that corruption incidentally prevents the addict from being aware of what they're doing.
Sure.
We think we are, but we're actually not. So it's like.
With that being known, how do you come to a place where you're like, I have a problem, I need to get help? How do you see through all that gray cloudiness?
I guess most people would refer to the rock bottom event.
So what was your rock bottom event?
My rock bottom was getting a prescription for a barbiturate of all things. So I got exposed to these drugs. It's called Fioricet. It was a drug. It's like a Quaalude. It used to be prescribed for migraines, like in the 60s and 70s, before they came out with like Imitrex and other things.
Sure.
And the active barbiturate is butalbital, and I love the way these things made me feel. They made me feel like Marilyn Monroe looked when she sang "Happy Birthday" to JFK. Like it just weirded out. And there was kind of a narcotic effect, a soothing, warm feeling as well. Anyway, so I'd had a tolerance to just about every pharmaceutical that I could ever take. So I took 3 of these, and then I took a few more, and that was around noon. And by 7 p.m., I had taken the entire bottle. 30 pills were gone, and I was driving around looking for beer and cigarettes. I was so messed up that I went to the Texaco in town where I live, where I always got gas, and I put a big tall boy of Heineken on the counter, and I asked the guy for some cigarettes, and he just looked at me. This poor Indian guy was like, "You don't buy beer and cigarettes." And I said, "I know, but I want some, and I'm in a wheelchair." And he's like, okay, whatever. It was a Saturday night, and he goes, that'll be $11.70. And I was so messed up that I didn't have my wallet. And I went, oh, you know what? I'm broke. Can I pay you tomorrow? And he just looked at me like, yeah, just go. Just go. So
Wow.
I got in my car and I drove home and I knocked the rearview mirror off my car. My wife and my eldest son were in the front yard. And she said, what's going on? Your rearview mirror's hanging out. And I got out and I just laid into her. I started verbally abusing her, telling her I wanted a divorce, telling her that I was going to marry up, saying all this crazy crap. And it was the straw that broke her camel's back. She had been dealing with me lying and spending money on drugs and going through these episodes. She was just done. You know, it all began in like 2005. She had given me so many last chances.
Mm-hmm.
She was going to take the kids. I grabbed the boys and took them into the master bedroom and shut the door. At this point, she was afraid for their safety, so she called 911.
Mm-hmm.
So before I knew it, there was an Atlanta police car and an ambulance from Grady Hospital here in Atlanta in front of our house. The lights are going, the blue lights like bouncing off the house. Our neighbors, these poor millennials had just moved into the house next to us and they were having a housewarming party. And like, so all of them are standing outside. There's neighbors across the street, all looking at me, just terribly concerned. My wife is trying to get the kids into her car. And I thought it was hilarious. That's how crazy I had become. I was sarcastic with the officers and the paramedics, and it was a miracle that I wasn't arrested. But you know, I was on my property, and I kind of knew that they didn't have grounds to take me anywhere. So she left with the boys. Wouldn't answer my texts, wouldn't answer my calls. A couple of days passed, still not answering it, and I had this sort of existential crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been going to AA meetings off and on over the years. Never had been in serious treatment, but I knew where meetings were, and I knew intuitively that that's what I needed to go do. Okay, dude, you're unemployed, you're in a wheelchair, you just had a complete psychotic episode on drugs, your wife and kids are gone, you go to a meeting. And so I went to a meeting and I just broke down sobbing,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that my life was in shambles. And they all kind of circled around me. And this one guy said, have you thought about going into treatment? Thought about going to rehab? And it was like, no, actually. And that's exactly what I need to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started calling treatment centers and found one in the area. You know, I'm such a,
There you are. Can you hear me?
yeah, it's probably getting sick of listening to me. So I'll try to
No, I don't
wrap it
think
up.
so.
So I went, you know, on a very selfish level. Yeah, I wanted to go into rehab. I knew that I needed to experience it, but I also was deeply hoping that it would save my marriage.
Okay.
The act of going, but she was so far removed from even caring. You know, she cared. Like, good, great, go get help, whatever. But I had like ruined her trust so many times that she had already divorced herself emotionally. She made that decision. And she's a smart, well adjusted person. So, you know, I completely get why she did what she did.
Sure.
And at this point, I credit her with putting me in the direction that has led to this conversation.
Yes.
You know, we're on good terms now, but I have these really obnoxious long-winded answers. The answer to your question was my rock bottom was my wife leaving me, my life being in shambles, knowing that I needed help, and at year 27 of active addiction, knowing that I was at a crossroads,
Sure.
knowing that, you know, on a spiritual level, that I had to make some profound changes. And I'm a slow learner, so a late bloomer. So I knew that I was ready. You know, it's like it's time. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm lucky that I'm not one of these many people who have that experience incarcerated,
Sure.
you know, or die.
Absolutely.
so I just try to, count my blessings. And when I got into treatment and you know, they, they did a good job of underscoring the need to grow along spiritual lines. And, I've been raised fairly Christian, but I was mostly kind of a very secular humanist
Sure.
person, intellectual. Did the common mistake of confusing religion with spirituality and God. And they did a good job in treatment of pointing out that, addiction to them and to many is a physical, biological issue, but it's also kind of a spiritual thing. The whole higher power thing kind of helps us get out of ourselves,
Yes.
and helps us, I think, undo some of those physical changes to the brain by praying, by
Sure.
meditating, by trying to, think abstractly about, our lives and our relationships to the universe. I call it God just because I get tired of hearing people, because a lot of people in meetings and a lot of people in AA, they say higher power and they say my higher power. And for me as a liberal arts major, I had this philosophy teacher who was like, beware of anyone who ever says my truth, because he was a Jesuit. So he's like, look, philosophically speaking, I don't want to get you in arguments at parties, but philosophically speaking, truth is objective, and that's the whole point. You don't say my truth. It's like that's someone saying my experience, my opinion, but truth means, there's no such thing as alternative facts. It's either a fact or it isn't.
I gotcha.
And so, I don't bring this up in AA meetings, but my higher power, I just want to say, you mean God? Let's just call it God. Come on. That doesn't mean that I'm an evangelical or anything, but when I look at those Hubble space photographs of nebula and stuff out there, I'm like, that blows my mind. And there are these like laws of nature that kind of seem like there's a design at work. And so I just went from being an agnostic person for 27 years to being one who's like, you know what? I'm not only going to believe in God, I'm going to believe in Santa and Bigfoot and UFOs, and I'm all in.
Gotcha. But and it seems like that that bottom, that event that really shakes you up and says, something's got to change, forces you to look at whatever's going on, whatever you're struggling with, like right in the face, and say, like, I can't hide from this anymore. I can't come up with reasons why this is okay. I can't be in denial. I have to look at this straight on. But once you do that, there's a grace to that freedom that you allow yourself.
Absolutely. It's completely liberating. And I just feel like, and it doesn't have to be, that surrender doesn't have to be a negative thing.
No, it's a very positive thing, I would think.
But I think as addicts, when you're in that moment, you're pretty beaten up.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I don't want to downplay that part of it.
No, I didn't feel like you were, but it's like, I had great experiences in treatment with, a guy who kind of walked us through the basics of meditation, and he would just say, not our thoughts. Our brains kind of tend to, as we get older, our thought kind of has power over us, and we get all figured out. We tell ourselves things. And he was basically going through, cognitive psychology 101. But he's like, just remember that, when you meditate, there's no wrong way to do it. And there are multiple ways of looking at things. And, just because your spouse or your family or the cops or your lawyers or your coworkers, just because they think you suck, we're all just going through, we're all doing the best we can to kind of make sense out of this journey. And so that was really helpful to me to kind of be at peace with the catastrophic smoking crater that my life kind of seemed to be at that moment. It was like, all right, well, at least I'm not doing that crazy shit anymore, and I'm going to be the help me too, because like when I look back at my life, so they make, I think there's a standard uh, exercise that's done in most 12-step 5-week standard recovery programs, rehab experiences. They all have their own thing, but you get homework assignments like weekly. You meet with a group, you have a case manager. They start out easy, and then you have kind of a term paper that is going to be due at the end, and you're assigned all this stuff early on. And the first one's easy, but the big one is your timeline, and it's very simple. It's simple and daunting in its simplicity. It's tell me your life story, starting with the day you were born. To include as much as you want in it. Here's a spiral notebook. Just go back, leave some spaces, because you're going to remember things at week 2 that you wanted to put in week 1, and you just jot down events and things. And for a lot of people, traumatic events come up and stuff like that. But it was helpful to me because it gave me a certain perspective on things. And you hear about these fundamental tenets while you're in treatment. And according to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, getting right with God, trying to grow along spiritual lines, acknowledging that you've got an issue, working with others, but honesty is a huge one. And so it dawned on me that, I think the first drug that I was addicted to was lying as a kid, as a very young kid, and knowing, this is kind of scary, knowing that I was exceptionally good at it, and did not have any ethical or moral reservations about fibbing. I have made great arguments to myself. It's like Richard Nixon lied, politicians lie, corporate executives lie. I had all these examples that helped me feel like it didn't matter.
Sure.
So that kind of, I think, in many cases metastasizes for addicts, because we will fib to get what we want. We'll fib to our boss about being sick and all this stuff. So that was one of those sort of spiritual moments where I felt like maybe there was a higher power talking to me, like a little light bulb went off.
Yes.
That said, you need to stop doing that. No, you really, that's a big issue with you. And it's messed up a lot of relationships over the years. And so, they talk about rigorous honesty in recovery. And so that's just something that I've been working on. Like, wow, I can't do it at all. So it's like, even, I just try to be pure in that sense. And sometimes it's hard. It's the white lies that are the hard ones. The big ones, like where it's obvious that I need to tell the truth and I'm just going to do it. Those I think that you feel like a lot's on the line. So for some reason with me, that's easier. There's, the line, it's a white and black situation. Gotcha. It's the little white ones that I think that you can kind of get habituated to over the years. Like, I want to go do this thing. I've got plenty of vacation time. I'm just going to call in sick. No, not for addicts. It's the kiss of death. So it's like, okay, how do I phrase this email? Well, something came up as honest. I'm not saying, what
right.
it is.
Right.
Is it personal and entertainment related? Yes, but it's still something.
Right.
That's been one thing, that's been part of the process. Humility, gratitude, honesty, all those things. And
well, if there was one thing that you wanted to give to someone who may be struggling or maybe in this journey right now, what would it be to sort of encourage them to get help or, take those first steps?
I would probably say talk to a therapist if you have that option.
Mhm.
It wouldn't hurt to get a professional's opinion, somebody who you can trust, that you can go in confidence. If you happen to have an employee assistance program at work, you can get some free therapy. Find somebody, maybe not a psychiatrist, maybe just a psychologist that has some experience in addiction, somebody that you're comfortable having a conversation with, because they will be non-judgmental. They're not going to try to push you in a specific direction. Just make sure you look for somebody that's licensed, and just be honest with them about the situation. If somebody is wondering whether or not they have a problem with drugs or alcohol, the joke I like to make is people that don't have those problems tend not to think those, wonder whether or not they do.
That's a good
But
point.
in AA, there's a very unofficial test for drinkers, and I think it applies to others as well, to see if you have an issue. And that's basically, can you have one drink without wanting another one? Is it never an issue for you to stop at half a glass of wine and you don't think about it? If you always want one more after one, doesn't mean you're an alcoholic, doesn't mean you're an addict. It means that you might want to be careful. The other thing is, have you ever tried to stop for an extended period of time? An extended period of time isn't a month, isn't 2 months. Have you ever stopped for like a year without having any issues with stopping?
Okay.
That doesn't mean that you're an addict or an alcoholic. But if one or both of those things, if you can't answer yes to them, you might want to go talk to a therapist. And I would also say, give yourself a break to that person. It's okay. If you are, then you have an illness. You might, I don't know if it's really a disease, because disease to me feels like you didn't create it. And so it's a little tricky there. But if you
Gotcha.
are, you might have a common behavioral issue, and it's not your fault. I think that it happens to people from all walks of life. To just be nice to yourself and not feel guilty about it, and just know that it is possible to arrest that malady.
Mhm.
We're never cured, but it's like the allergy metaphor is used often in recovery circles these days, because it's said that addicts kind of react differently, or it's thought that addicts react differently to being buzzed than other people. It seduces us in a different way, and kind of sinks its teeth into us in a way that's unique. So it's like being under a bad magic spell. It's not anything that someone should be faulted for. And if they've tried and not succeeded at addressing an addiction issue, you're not alone. There are resources out there, and so
Well,
I know.
I see a very strong person who is obviously been successful in getting through this journey. Yes, you. And I think that, and I appreciate you for sharing your story and for trying to make other people better versions of themselves. And not only have you, succeeded in getting through the addiction journey, but you're also succeeding with your physical limitations as well. And I think that's amazing.
Thank you so much. Flattery and compliments will get you everywhere.
Well, thank you, Devin, so
You're
much for
welcome.
being here today. I really appreciate your time.
And my pleasure. It was a great way to wrap up the week. I hope you have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you. You too.